When was the last time you saw a Las Vegas protest covered on national television? What about local television? Or when was the last time you even just saw one driving around town? Chances are it's hard to think of one. So today on CityCast Las Vegas, we're talking with award-winning journalist Nayoka Foreman and criminal defense attorney David Figler to find out why protests have had so much trouble gaining traction here in Las Vegas. It's Wednesday, July 8th. I'm Jesse Merrick, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. All right, Nayoka, David, how's it going? We're talking protests today. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, I'm against this one. I'm outside your house right now, Jesse.
Oh, no. You're starting the protest early. Nayoka, let's start with you because I'm curious, again, with this conversation of protests and the fact that it's hard to remember many large ones here in Las Vegas outside of 2020, really. What's the biggest protest that you've seen in Las Vegas, again, outside of the 2020 demonstrations?
A really large one that happened in Las Vegas very recently was the response to Renee Good's killing. That saw thousands of people outside of the federal building in downtown Las Vegas on Las Vegas Boulevard. So there were some big protests that happened. They may not happen in the ways that maybe you see on television in LA, where people are taking over freeways. They're much more contained here, but there are some large-scale protests that happen with large demonstrations as well.
They're the big ones, the No Kings and some of the ICE ones, things that, spark national protests in cities across the country. Las Vegas is not outside of that, When they do happen, they may be a little more, I like the word that Nayoka used, contained. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And not to say that they need to be rowdy. I certainly don't think that to be true. I don't like when people go there with the intent to, be violent or clash. And I don't think that happens very often. But, we do see Las Vegas participating when other cities participate. My kind of concern, not necessarily concern, but my observation is that outside of what's really just a smattering, a handful of really devoted activists who will show up on the courtroom steps for something very specific, we aren't a city that's really built for or used to protests. I think the biggest, homegrown protest that people can remember goes all the way back to the 70s when there were people who were very upset with some policies locally that were impacting people who were living in poverty. And they marched up and down the strip to Caesar's Palace. There's a very famous series of documentaries and books called Storming Caesar's Palace that talk about that. But, that was half a century ago.
Yeah, Storming Caesar's Palace will definitely get people talking. But I'm curious, for a protest, especially here, David, you noted a lot of them contained a bit more, than others. So Nayoka, is it as, easy as kind of just showing up on a street corner with a sign, or does it involve something more to kind of really get a protest going here?
I would say it's much deeper than just organizing a protest and saying that we're going to show up, for whatever cause. I think that the larger issue in Nevada that may not be talked about is a lack of civic education. Nevada is ranked historically low in education overall. On top of that, when do you learn about civics? I went to school here. I'm born and raised. I went to CCSD, and I learned about government as a senior. And it was about the structure of government. It wasn't teaching how to actually participate in your own community. So I think a lot of, needing to galvanize people to play a role in democracy, it may be protesting, it may be showing up at a public meeting. You would first need that foundational education to understand, why should I even show up to a protest? And to touch on what David was saying, with the policing aspect, you have the police tension, and then you also have people who may not even know why it even is so serious to show up with all these police around. And now there's drones and there's riot gear. Why should I be in a place that feels like it may not be a safe place to be? you need that foundational education. And I think that's a big part of why we don't see large crowds galvanizing around certain issues in Nevada in a way that, you may compare to another city. Because like I said, there is a lot of protesting and galvanizing around certain issues. They're just a little bit more siloed and a little bit more contained and a little bit more organized and strategic.
Yeah, and I want to dig in a little bit more on the policing of protests. David, you wrote an op-ed for the Indy about this and, dove into that a little bit. What makes us, I guess, different, or what stands out about the policing by Metro at protests here in Las Vegas?
I'd say in a word that it is over-the-top preventativeness to a degree. There seems to be this kind of attitude that the police are responsible for making sure that nothing goes wrong during some kind of protest. And to do that, they use all these tools, and they have so many tools, both through the law and literally through their militarized equipment and presumably their training to shut it down when, and this is probably the problem, when they feel that it's done, when they feel that it's over. And I think this actually, and I didn't think about it this way in the op-ed, though I tried to be thoughtful, it really is kind of an issue of civic education all around. I don't know that a lot of the police officers have that same degree of civic education. And I'm not saying that facetiously. I think a lot of the protesters don't too. I mean, you hear about an issue, maybe it gets, your blood going. It's something important to you. So you want to join, you want to be out there in numbers. But how many people really know, like, how to frame the call to action or what you're looking for and who to direct it at and where? So we wind up in these kind of same places in front of the courthouse. You have a series of speeches sometimes, which are sometimes great. Sometimes they're politicians, sometimes they're citizens. Rarely are the police participating, even though they're citizens too. And so it's almost like they're taking a position of animosity or opposition. At least that's what it feels like it comes off as sometimes, because, oftentimes I would say that the protests would be about bigger issues like the over-militarization of our society, or, the way that the police go about their day-to-day business. And I'm imagining if I'm a police officer, I don't want to hear that, or I'm ignoring that. And it makes this weird little tension. Look, I have a lot of older people in my life who are old 60s radicals or 70s radicals, and they want to get back into the game, and they're a little, long in the tooth now. They come and they'll call me and they'll say, well, if I get arrested, I'm like, oh, come on, great grandma, you're not going to get arrested, but you might. What should I do?
You never know.
They report back to me afterwards that they really felt so icky, uncomfortable, seeing snipers pointing guns at them, or seeing tanks around the corner, or seeing even more police officers than other people. And it just makes it very uncomfortable for them to even be out there, despite the fact that I'd say that the vast majority of protests, big, medium, and large, have no intention of getting to the point where police intervention is even needed.
Step into the movies with the Neon Museum's new movie tour in the heart of Las Vegas. Take a guided walk through real neon backdrops that have lit up some of Hollywood's most memorable scenes. It's perfect for film lovers and Vegas fans who want to see the city through a cinematic lens. You can explore glittering neon landscapes that have actually appeared on the silver screen and see how Las Vegas has been portrayed in classic films and modern blockbusters over the decades. Discover how the La Concha lobby was a key setting in Martin Scorsese's 1995 film, Casino, and stand where Robert De Niro and Sharon Stone filmed their romantic evening as Ace and Ginger. You can trace even more movie history from pre-code Hollywood all the way to contemporary blockbusters to discover how Las Vegas earned its reputation as the entertainment capital of the world through film. Hear insider stories and fun trivia that bring these movie moments to life and capture unforgettable photos surrounded by the glow of real Hollywood-used neon. Join fellow cinephiles on a one-of-a-kind tour that turns the Neon Museum into your own movie set. Get your tickets today at neonmuseum.org. I am curious, for us, because we have to understand, we are a tourist city. The Strip is a big part of, why people come here and everything like that. So is there a way to balance the policing of protests while still maintaining, our image in a sense, down on the Strip and everything? And because the thing that I wonder is like, if it was like a free for all down on the Strip, and is that going to affect our image nationally? And could that really hurt us more in the long run? You know what I mean?
I think David kind of nailed it when he said the last protest on the Strip that was really disruptive was in 1971. That's during the Black Power movement. That's during the Civil Rights movement. That's not too far removed from those larger movements. So I think the nation, including Nevada, was familiar with large scale protests. Now we're in this moment where protesting and free speech and, certain ideas are being challenged in ways that were challenged during segregation. So it's just a very different moment right now. And people are afraid to participate. They're afraid to share their ideology. And that's on the right side, that's on the left side.
So for both of you guys, then, like, what's the fix? Like, what's the happy medium between the two of balancing Metro being involved, but also letting people feel safe, at these protests and be okay with going down there? Because as you said, David, you have friends telling you, like, I don't want to get arrested. Like, what's the fix for this one?
Yeah, I mean, the Strip is such a natural draw for people looking for attention because it is our most famous street. And I don't know that every protest, is best served by a march up and down the Strip because it is logistically sort of difficult, for anyone to just simply walk, let alone be part of a larger protest. And, maybe back
anybody
in
that's tried to walk the Strip knows that.
Yeah, no joke. And then, back in 1971, I mean, there was a certain degree of desperation. These were all, led by local moms like the late, great Ruby Duncan, who just passed, who, said, look, we're tired of being ignored. People need to know that this is a real issue for us here at home. And so they took to the most high profile way that they can do it. And as I understand that march itself, it wasn't really disrupted by the police. We didn't see the kind of things that we were seeing around the same time or maybe a little bit earlier in parts of the South looking for the same degree of sort of equity and racial equality and some of the other issues that were very prominent at that day and probably still are today. But I think that the fix, if you will, is that we need to be more mindful of I'm not going to get off this. I think more civic education, you've planted in my brain.
I think that's a good point, though.
That know exactly how to do and when protesting makes sense in the arsenal of tools that we as citizens have in our democracy. I was very encouraged to see people gather for the Utilities Commission when they were talking about the Nevada energy rate hikes. Yep. They were very organized. They were very thoughtful. They worked on their own logistics. They were directed. I talk about they did kind of rush a meeting at the Fontainebleau. I didn't think that was as effective as showing up at the, Utility Commission headquarters, basically, the day before a meeting, that they rallied to go do public comment, even though it turned out that because Las Vegas doesn't have those spaces and doesn't have that kind of infrastructure to allow large gatherings sometimes at the public meetings. A lot of people were stuck outside in the sun, which is really, really bad. Mm-hmm. But, I think the fix is that we aren't so quick to, limit where and how people can do what are otherwise peaceful protests. And I think one of the ways to do that is to change this law that gives so much discretion to the police to basically call it, to say, oh, we saw a couple of things that triggered what we think is the law of dispersal. We saw a couple of people who were walking in the street off the sidewalk. So now all the 1,000 other of you have to go home now or you will be arrested. And that's not the right way to do it. I think the big fix is to talk about how those dispersal orders are utilized, when they're utilized, and to have new limitations on it. I think that's a big one.
Yeah, to your point and to Nyoka's point about just educating people in general, on all of their rights, on both sides of it. Metro, the population, the people that are protesting, all those different things will be a game changer for sure. But there's also some other limitations. And David, you alluded to it just in terms of the structure of our city and, the Strip itself being really tough to navigate. So I wonder, Nyoka, is it as simple as designating more free speech zones or how do we make our city more open and more available for demonstrations like this to have a real measurable impact?
Yeah, I definitely think that policing plays a role. LVMPD has a lot of equipment, very high-tech drones and guns and things like that. I think that plays a role. But also, once again, galvanizing people is going to be a challenge. And I would say more resources put towards galvanizing people, more resources put towards civic engagement and towards nonprofits who could actually educate the public on ways to participate in democracy, because protesting is also looked at as something that people should not do. Not to call you out, David, but even in your opinion piece, you said you don't really like protests. It's not something that you want to be a part of. And today we are seeing 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds who are protesting in places like Boca Park or in Henderson near Horizon Ridge in these suburban communities because they know what is at stake for them. So once again, I would just say, policing plays a role, but a bigger role in protests not manifesting as these large scale demonstrations comes down to resources and civic education.
David, what more can we do too, though, I guess, to expand it and make it easier and more accessible for folks? You noted or linked, I think, to one of the articles about the No Kings protests and the fact that, right outside a couple of days before they're chopping trees down, obviously makes it a little tougher to stand out in the sun and things like that. How can we, stop things from like that happening? And again, designate areas to make it easier for this to happen.
Well, I would like to see government be more transparent, but also more mindful that this can and should happen and that they are going to listen. I mean, it's on both sides of the equation. There's nothing worse than being at a public meeting and watching the elected official who you came to give your 1 or 2 minute tight speech to sort of getting up and going to the bathroom or rolling their eyes or whatever it is. There needs to be engagement both ways. I was really saddened to see that City Hall, Las Vegas City Hall, had built this new giant, beautiful, over $100 million for a plaza, and it's locked all day. It's not a place that is going to be inviting to people coming and protesting. On the other hand, to make sure that those who do organize these sort of larger scale protests know what pardon the pun here, but the triggers are for the police. I mean, you don't want a situation like what happened down in Texas, which, people were protesting an ICE facility. Things got a little out of hand. One of the law enforcement people got shot. Thankfully, he recovered. But everybody who went to that protest, the 7 people, including someone who wasn't even at the protest, got 30 to 100 years in prison for their protests. Now, we could go into the minutiae of the details. We're not going to. But the bottom line is that, calling me out is perfectly acceptable because I don't want to go to prison for 50 years because I carried a bunch of zines.
I don't think anybody does.
out to a protest, So that temperature, if you want to call it that, needs to be lowered, and we need to encourage how we can engage and when we can engage. I mean, look, I sometimes don't approve of the way that public funds are expended through the LVCVA. I try to go see their meetings online. They're not always posted. I don't know that I'm going to galvanize a bunch of people to go to the convention center for one of their big meetings and go outside to kind of try to convince them or to hear me that there should be more thoughtfulness when they're spending public funds for our community. So, I think it really is a matter of learning how better to get to the people that need to hear what your message is. But when it does come time for these bigger scale protests, et cetera, that the powers that be, city, county, whatever municipality or the police need to just be more accommodating and friendly to it.
So in this question, I wonder, though, as we continue to grow, as a city, obviously, like Vegas is known as a transient city, but since the 90s, our population has really exploded, doesn't seem to be slowing down too much. So as we continue to grow, what are some of the things that I guess are going well for us that we can continue to hammer home as our population grows? And hopefully people do continue to get more and more involved as they set down roots here.
I think that protesters, community organizers, they have been very consistent in protesting, organizing around the issues that a lot of people are talking about right now. As we move forward, that's another challenge that you highlighted. This is a transient community. So we have to constantly engage the community. And if I can think about an agency that's doing it right, I would look at the Nevada Secretary of State, which created a new process at that agency which is community engagement. Now they're putting resources towards engaging the community, which, according to the deputy director, that is something that is very new to that office. So I would say that's a good example of how we can move forward as a state to keep people engaged in the process.
And I think the thing that we do really well here is we do peaceful protests really well. And the organizers who are able to kind of galvanize people to come out are good at getting the word out. I do think that people see these lingering images of chemical agents and smoke in the air or like things put on fire and all that stuff. And I think that is such the minority of outgrowths of any protests. And I would say arguably that some of those images wouldn't happen if the police didn't react in the way that they did at the time that they did, and having gone through the 2020 protests as a lawyer representing tons and tons of people pro bono, including people who are now judges, by the way, it was just a mess. It was just an overreaction. It was a absolutely peaceful protest that is going to be remembered by a lot of people as not being so because of the way it went down. So I think we need to recognize that the vast majority of people, when they do choose to protest in public spaces here in Las Vegas, their intention is peaceful, their execution is peaceful, and but for, a couple of exceptions or some of the circumstances that are beyond their control, they do remain peaceful. And I think that should be remembered and encouraged and contextualized at all times.
As you said in your story, vibrant and thoughtful protests can be a healthy indicator of a grown-up, first-class city that recognizes that some issues need a loud, steady beat so they're taken seriously. And at the end of the day, I think that's all that all of us here are hoping for here in Las Vegas going forward. So hopefully we see more of those and we continue to be taken seriously on the national stage. David, Nyoka, thank you so much for today's time and discussion as well.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks, Jesse. You quoted me to me. I'm not going to protest you anymore.
That's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our free morning newsletter as well. And don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Las Vegas neighbor at membership.citycast.fm/Las Vegas. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Until then, though, take care.